Okay, there's another Tuy Hoa mission. This is kind of a 2-day story for a mission we flew in South Vietnam and a little bit into Laos. A little background, I was in the chow hall one morning, eating chow, and I looked up and there was a guy standing in the chow hall line that had kind of ratty knee-high shorts on and beat-up tennis shoes and an old ragged t-shirt, and he had a Car-15 rifle strapped on his shoulder. That Car-15 is like an M16, but it's only got 10-inch barrel and it's got a shortened stock. It's really built for fighting in a phone booth. And so I asked the guy, I said, what is this fellow, you know, a contractor or a CIA guy? He said, no, he's a Raven. And if you're not aware of Ravens, there's a good book out by Christopher Robbins. It's just called The Ravens. And you can find them on eBay, and it's a really interesting read. Well, the Ravens were Air Force officers, pilots, that flew O-1 aircraft over in Laos, and they flew only in civilian clothes with no ID on them at all. And the airplanes that they were flying were O-1s. They were all painted solid gray, and they had the tops of the wings painted white so that you could spot them against the green background down there. The only ID that they had for the airplanes was a bill of sale that showed it to, you know, somebody like Joe Bag of Donuts at a commercial sale in Thailand. And one of the things I picked up out of this Raven book, it says the standard loadout for the Raven is he'd walk out to the airplane with a Car-15 and a bag of hand grenades, and they use it for their close air support. They take a hand grenade and they pull a pin and stick it in a mason jar and then throw the mason jar out. When a mason jar breaks, well, then the hand grenade will go off. But if you have a loader transporter, which you got in the back seat, is a little Laotian guy, and his job is to pull the pins and stick them in the mason jar, and then the fact throws them out the window. He's the actual bomber. It's kind of primitive, but it worked. And they're working for a fellow named Vang Pao, who was the general that kind of owned the Laotian army, which really wasn't much of an army. And what was going on in Laos at the time was that the North Vietnamese were in there, and the Pathet Lao were the Laotian Communist Army. They were allied with the North Vietnamese. And these Facs lived with these Laotian guys, they got to be good friends with Vang Pao, the general. And one of the things I picked up in the book is that they'd have a lot of evening sessions with them where they drink the Laotian whiskey and then have a good time. They suck the brains out of chicken heads. So that's kind of the deal it was up there. So anyway, the wing started an exchange with these guys. So they could send a couple of Ravens in and they'd call wing headquarters, scheduling, and find out who was flying a two-seater that day and then get a hold of them and see if they could jump in the back seat. And I lost my roommate, and so I had an open bunk. And squadron commander asked me if I could host one of these guys. I said, sure. So I had a guy rooming with me for a while. And they spent a lot of time at the taco bar, and what they do is they handed out everybody their frequencies. They said, if you're ever in Laos, give us a call. We'll put something together. So anyway, on this one particular day, I'm scheduled as number 2 with a fellow named Arlie Bishop, who is a senior captain and is a pretty aggressive guy. And we were scheduled into I Corps. I Corps is just south of the North Vietnamese border. So the way it works is you take off, you got one of 2 loads, what we call a hard load, which is either a 500 or a 750-pound bomb. And our Mark 82s had fuse extenders on them. We referred to them as daisy cutters. They had a 3-foot fuse extender. And that would put all the frag pattern on that gun right on the surface, as opposed to an instantaneous fuse that didn't have it, would go off about 3 feet on the ground, and you lose a lot of your frag pattern. And the soft load was what we call snakes and 20 mic. It was napalm, retarded 500-pound bombs, so it'd be dropped at low altitude, and 20 mil, of course. So what happens is you check in with the ABCCC, and he's kind of the go-between between the Facs and the fighters. And a FAC will call ABCCC and say, I got troops in contact, I need fighters. And so CCC then will assign the soft load with napalm and hydraulic to that target. And once in a while, if he thinks he's got a troop concentration in heavier jungle, he'll ask for the 500 pounders, the daisy cutters. what we had that day was 500 pounders with daisy cutter fuses. So we checked in with ABCCC, and he hands us off to a FAC and I-Corps. And I-Corps is just south of the North Vietnamese border. And they had a AAA site up there that's causing some problems. You see, after the bombing halt in October, all of those guns, or most of those guns, are up there in North Vietnam, were towable, and they just towed them into South Vietnam. And there was a lot of AAA and I-Corps just south of the North Vietnamese border. And then a lot of them went into Laos also. So we checked in with the FAC. There's a nail FAC, and the nails worked along the Ashaw Valley border and into Laos and South Vietnam also. So we check in with him, and he says, I got a AAA site over here, so I'm standing about 3 miles away. He said, I'll talk into the area, and when I get you in the area, so I'm going to launch a smoke rocket, and then we'll try to give you, refine the eyeballs to where we got the gun site. So anyway, we do that, and Arlie says, I got the site. I said, okay, so he tells me to take space in. So I drop back up about 1,000 feet, and down back about 2,000 feet. And Arlie says, let's take drop pairs. And so what I did, instead of just a pair where you'd be too close together, I'd hit once, twice, and a little delay, and I spaced my bombs. So we made 2 passes and dropped all our bombs, and the FAC said, okay, so I'm not seeing a lot of activity over there, but stand by this creek. And it said, I'll see what I can see over there. So the FAC says, you got it. He said, that's a direct hit on that site. He said, so take a AAA site destroyed and 5 KVA. KVA, or killed by air, and that's your what you're looking for. That's what you put on the wall at night. So now what we should have done right then was said, okay, let's get a battle damage check. But we didn't do that. We had another thing on our mind, and Arlie said, you want to contact that FAC, that Raven FAC? I said, sure. Now it's starting to get dark, and what I just had in my mind is when we get in there at Laos, just before dark, we might get some trucks out on the road up there. You know, we can really do some work. So we call check in with the FAC, with that FAC frequency, and the Raven comes up right away. He says, I'm on board, and he says, come on in. He says, I got a little area I've been watching for about 2 or 3 days. He said, I'm about 3 miles away from it, but he says, it's easy to find. He said, you continue on, we're going pretty far north into Laos now. North Vietnamese off our right shoulder, North Vietnam. And so he said, you're going to come to a river, fly up that river till you hit a big sandbar. There's a sandbar that kind of comes into the left-hand side of the river. And right there where that sandbar and the river meets, and then that jungle in there, he says, what we've been watching for a couple of days, and he says, there's a lot of activity in there, and I think it might be kind of a transshipment area. He says, I can't give you any reports on ground fire because nobody's hit it yet. He said, I'm holding about 3 miles away, so no restriction on route attack heading, so do whatever you want. So he said, okay, so Arlie just told me, he says, take space in, you know, so I did. I dropped back, and Arlie said, we'll plan on 2 passes. So we made 2 passes and fired out. And on the first one, when I walked across the circle, and I was watching close for a AAA, I didn't see anything. So he did the same for me. He didn't see anything from shooting at me, and so one more. And the last 2, I figured there's not much in there. It was just like strafing on a controlled range. We were getting pretty low, but it was also getting pretty dark. So after we expended our 20 mil, we told Ravens, well, we're bingo bullets, we're going to head out. He said, all right, thanks for the work, come back any day. And so we head up and go south till we get south of the North Vietnamese border, and then turned in. And we're heading out to go to Feet Wet. Feet Wet is where we go out to the ocean and then head south down to Tuy Hoa. And then if you have a problem, you have to bail out. You bail out into the ocean and spend the night with the sharks as opposed to bailing out in I-Corps and ended up with 2 broken legs hanging in the tree till morning. I don't know, 5 minutes heading out to the east, and Arlie says, maybe we better get a battle damage check. And I was thinking, yeah, we probably ought to do that. So I rolled in on Arlie and come up on his left wing. I said, well, Arlie, you got a hole about the size of a softball in the front of your drop tank, And he says you got a hole coming out the back of your drop tank. It's about the size of a basketball. It looks like it detonated in your tank. But our drop tanks were dry, which was the good news. But if you think about that hit, that round came in, he had to be pointed directly at the gun in a 45-degree dive angle, in which he was. And that round traversed the entire length of the fuselage. If it had been 2 foot over to the left, Arnie would have taken that hit in the cockpit, and then it would have run into the motor, and the airplane would have blown up. And I said, it looks like you got some holes up on the vertical stabilizer, but it's so dark I can't see that much. And Harley said, well, hell, everything looks good in the cockpit. And I said, well, I'm looking, I don't see any hydraulic leaks or anything, I can't see any smoke, anything like that. I said, I guess that's it. He said, all right. He says, you got the lead, let me check you over. So he goes up, he says, on the left side, he says, left side looks clean. He goes, on the other section, but the right side ain't quite so clean. He says, it looks like you got, shrapnel hits in there. He says, there's about a bunch of kind of ragged areas on the fuselage. But he says, I said, what does it look like in the cockpit? I said, everything looks good. Hydraulic pressure's up, fuel flow looks good. No, we didn't even know what they'd been shooting at us over there, and this wasn't in Laos. We got those hits in South Vietnam before we went in. We went into Laos with battle damage on 2 airplanes before we got them after battle damage check. He said, okay, well, let's head feet wet. So we're heading out, and about 10 minutes later, I said, hey, Arnie, I got an engine fire light. And the first thing he says, you bailing out? Man, I didn't want to bail out, because that's just a bad country, The North Vietnamese owned that goddamn country up there. About all the U.S. had was these fire bases. And it was during the daytime you bail out there, the Army would see you parachute, and they'd have helicopters racing to pick you up. But at night, it's a whole different deal. So then I'm thinking, well, after I've gone through all this in my mind, I haven't blown up yet, And what I remember from Luke Air Force Base, they told us, in F-100, if you get an engine fire light, that's a courtesy light, to let you know that you're going to blow up in about 30 seconds. But I didn't, so I figured, well, chances are that that's a bad light. But I told Arnie, I said, I'm aborting into Phuket. So he said, okay, so I'm following. He said, I'm going to follow you, and I'm going to be on your back and forth and checking your fuselage. He said, if I see a burn through, you got to bail out. I said, I understand. He said, okay. He said, I'm going to be watching you close. So I called Phuket Tower, and I said, I'm setting up for Australia, and I'm about 10 miles out, and I got an engine fire light. And they said, okay, we got you covered. So they had all the fire trucks and everything out there, and so I landed, and I got surrounded by trucks, and I just jumped over the side, wanted to wait for a ladder. Because if this thing blows now, I want to be close to it. So they got everything all settled down there, and then they went up and got my parachute, got my helmet, brought that down to me. So a guy walked up to me from the pilot from the 355th Squadron. The 355th was the Air National Guard volunteer unit. It was flying out of Phuket. And all ANG pilots. And he told me, he says, hey, my roommate is in Hong Kong, and he says, I got an extra rack if you want to use it. And I said, hell yeah, So I went with him over to his house, took my helmet over there, laid that there, and he says, then we need to go to the bar. And so they had, their officers' club was kind of dug out, about 10 foot underground. They had big logs across the top and sandbags and dirt and everything, it was like down in a dungeon. But it was a pretty lively place, because the only other place to go at Phuket was, to the bar, no place else. So it was a standard fighter bar, a lot of songs, a lot of 4, 5, 6 playing dice games. So we had a pretty good time in there that night. So the next day, I said, okay, I got to find out when I could get out of here. So I'd go over to the hangar, and I see this master sergeant over there, and I said, that's my airplane there. I'm anxious to get back to Tuy Hoa. We got it ready fixed. No, not quite. He said, you aren't going anywhere for a little while. He said, your fire light was easy. He said, you get the cable for that fire light, he says, a shrouded cable, and you had a little shrapnel hit to cut that insulation. So he says, that light was just hanging by about 2 copper threads. He says, and then it was just a normal vibration, and they broke, and then your light came on. We said, you got some other problems. We had some sheet metal problems. He says, and the sheet metal guys worked that last night. That's done. But he says, we got some other minor stuff we got to do. He said, we got one kind of major problem. He says, well, for us, because we need a part, and we don't have it. And he said, we're asking the other F-100 bases, and if we can find it, it'll be a couple days. We have to bring one in from the base, from the U.S., it'll be a week or 2 weeks. I said, oh shit. I said, well, I got to get to Tuy Hoa. I said, you got any ideas? Is there a shuttle or anything? He said, no, but we got an Army aviation detachment here. He says, and those guys, they fly over the damn country, so you go, somebody's going to be going in your direction. So I walked into this Army aviation department. I grabbed his captain, and talked to him, and I told him what I needed to get to Tuy Hoa. He said, we can do that. And he called a guy over. He said, this guy is going to Phu Hep. And Phu Hep is an Army MASH hospital, was just kind of annexed onto Tuy Hoa. So he said, he'll take you right to the ramp. So the guy said, well, we're going to be ready to go in about a half hour. He said, and I said, okay, I'll be here. He said, I got to make one stop. I got to stop at a fire base because I got to deliver the mail. I said, all right. So I met him, we took off. We're flying down the coast about 1,200, 1,500 feet. And I was looking down at this crystal blue water. I said, man, this would be a great place for a resort if it wasn't infested with Vietnamese. But a bunch of sharks, you could just see them in the water just lined up facing the shore. And so we're heading down there and everything's kind of cool. And all of a sudden the goddamn car starts flying in circles, making these big circles. So I tapped this door gunner on the leg. I said, what the hell's going on here? He said, well, the fire base that we're going into is under mortar attack right now. And so I said, we got to get that situation cleared up before we can go in there. And what they do to clear it up is they send in a mortar team, like 2 guys in a mortar, and he'd harass you, and then they send out these teams with a sniper and find him and kill him. And so about 5 minutes later, he turns around with a big grin on his face and a thumbs up, and we got him. And I said, okay. So we go into this mortar base, and the damn mortar holes were still smoking. And a helicopter shuts down, and this guy jumps up out of the ground, and he runs to the helicopter, and he's got a mailbag going out, and they switch. It's like Pony Express. They switch mailbags. And then this little mountain yard guy comes and jumps in the damn back here and gets back in the corner and just kind of hunkers down in the corner. So I noticed his uniform, he's got 3 patches of orange patches on him, And I said, hey, what's the deal with that? Is it his rank or something? He said, no. He said, that's the number of times he's been shot. So, okay. So we got back to Tuy Hoa, and it was probably good, for our longevity that we both didn't get there at the same time, because I'd have probably said we were in Laos, and that would have been a killer. But Arlie, the first time you went to get into the base, head into the base, and you got battle damage, you got a call, I come with battle damage. And then, of course, the wing commander, the DO, somebody that meets you along with the intel guys, and they want to know where it was and what you're doing and all that stuff. So Arlie answered all that correctly. And so nobody said anything to me about the battle damage check and anything. And so that ended a 2-day odyssey in South Vietnam.